But visualization is I think we remember better if we're able to visualize.
Yeah.
If it's abstract words, then it's not as easy to commit to memory. But then building that habit of making sure that you're not zoning out, making sure that every sentence that you read, you're committing a certain level of visualization towards that, I think really helped. To the point where towards the end, I did not really have to tell myself before each question that, okay, I'm going to
Yeah.
visualize this, right? So in quants, it's clear what your errors are, right? So therefore, there is a path to improvement.
Yeah.
With verbal, it's a little more abstract because you don't really
Yeah.
know where you're going, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I really liked was the emphasis by you guys on maintaining an error log.
Yeah.
Of course, it helped me in quants as well, but in verbal, it helped me a lot because
Okay.
before setting up an error log, I wasn't sure what exactly I was doing incorrectly,
Yeah.
right? So I'd give one in the
Okay.
morning and one in the evening, right?
Okay.
So the reason why I want to do that is so that I have enough information to be able to take corrective action, right?
Right.
Because one test, I'm sure, it's happened to me many times that I've done really well in quant, even though I didn't feel like I did well, even though I didn't feel like I, let's say, quote unquote, deserved that score.
Okay.
Ended up doing pretty well in quants, but then that is not reflective of my capability or my
Right.
skill set up until that point. So, kind of decided that when I was going to take mocks, I was going to take more than one in a day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another debrief session with me. With me today, I have Asfan, who recently scored a wonderful and a fantastic 715, which is 99th percentile on the GMAT Focus Edition. Asfan started his journey with a 585 like many of you. Of course, 715 was his target, and that looked like a distant dream. But as they say, there's always the first step that needs to be taken. Asfan took that first step. He kept working hard. He kept knocking at the doors of excellence and success. And here he is with a 130-point improvement from a 585 to a 715. And if I just have to mention his score breakup, with a 715, he scored a V87, 99th percentile on verbal, which is a rare phenomena. He scores a Q86 and a DI83. On the 585, when he started, he was starting at a V83, which means verbal was at a decent level, but he wanted to improve it further, and which is why you see this 4-point improvement there. So we'll of course speak about what helped him improve from a V83 to an 87. Quant was at a 79, so he improved by good 7 points on Quant and scored a Q86. And DI was at a 79 and he scored an 83, again a 4-point improvement there. We'll dive into all of this, but before we do that, let's first ask Asman, how are you, Asman, and how does it feel to have scored a 99th percentile?
I'm good, Dhruv. Thank you so much for your kind words, and of course, I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank you for, your support throughout this entire journey, straight out of the bat. So we'll start with that. I'm feeling quite good. I'm feeling happy. It was the score that I sort of arbitrarily decided would be my target. Way back when I sort of started considering giving a GMAT, and to actually land at that same exact score is a pretty good feeling. So I'm very happy right now.
That's great. So Asman, was this your first attempt or did you have some previous attempts also?
No, this is my first attempt.
And probably the only attempt, right? So that's a cherry on the cake.
Yeah, should be. Yeah, hopefully.
Right, right.
Right.
So this is for all the people who believe that, it's not really possible to ace the GMAT right on the first go, right? So Asfan's story is a testament to if you are on the right track, right from the word go with your preparation, one attempt is more than enough, right? And we will discuss more on that. So Asfan, before we dive deep into your journey, let's just speak a bit about your background briefly. Does
Right.
this help our viewers understand a bit about your academic and professional background?
Right. So I'm a bachelor in mechanical engineering graduate from RV College of Engineering in Bangalore. I graduated in the year of 2019, post which I've had um, sort of different work experiences along the way. I work for a startup in Bangalore in a strategy role. Simultaneously, I've had a couple of business ventures as well that I've sort of managed. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
That's great. So Asfan, what prompted you to think of GMAT and then of course MBA?
Right. So it's something that's been on my mind for a very long time, ever since I graduated from engineering and made that decision that management is the kind of career that I want to get into. I think MBA was always on the cards. It was more about finding the right moment to make that switch. For me, it was always about ensuring that I have the right level of experience to be able to take a call like this.
Right,
Unfortunately, as it is the case for most of us, we don't really know why we picked our bachelor's. I did not want to have the same experience with my master's.
right.
So I wanted to give myself adequate time, and I think the time was right. So this year I decided I'm going to complete my GMAT journey and hopefully start my MBA application as well.
Understood, understood. Right. So what brought you to e-GMAT? When I ask this, I mean to say, if you can just help us briefly with the process of looking for the right kind of course that you believe would help you reach where you wish to see yourself in the GMAT journey.
Right. So it's actually very interesting that let me start off with how it was in the very beginning when I decided that I was going to take the GMAT, right? So most of us, I think it's the case that we sort of decide to do a GMAT, but we're not very sold on the idea that we will, right? So therefore, there's a lot of uncertainty there, and the decision-making process can become a hurdle to actually starting something because you have a multitude of options available. There's so many ads that you GMAT specific ads that you get, once
Yeah,
you start searching, that the decision can seem very overwhelming. Therefore, you tend to delay that decision, and because you're maybe not sure of doing the GMAT in the first place or maybe you're not sure of doing it right now, you keep postponing it, right? So I
right.
remember the very first time when I said with certainty that I'm going to attempt a GMAT sometime very soon. It took me 3 months to actually, for sure decide that I'm going to do it, right?
Right,
And part of that was this whole process of, okay, am I doing the right thing? What sort of preparation do I need, etc. Right? So obviously, I did a lot of online research and so the thing was, I felt like there was a lot of ambiguity around GMAT, right?
right,
So what exactly is going to be asked? What level of preparation is required for each of these topics, subjects? There's a lot of talk about the question bank in itself being a very a resource that you have to use carefully. Right? That's
right,
unlike any other experience that we've had prior, where you have as many questions as you want to practice. So with GMAT, I think there's a little bit of selectivity involved, right? So spent a lot of time trying to research in the beginning
right.
and luckily found a video just like this. I don't remember the person, but he scored a 725. And
Okay.
I think he was speaking with Rajat. And his journey and the way he sort of articulated his entire process, I resonated with, right?
Hmm.
And felt like everything that he described up until that point, I had felt as well. So therefore, this must be something, he must have done something right, right?
Yeah,
So part of the motivation why I'm sort of also interested in speaking today is because I went through the journey and it's been fairly fruitful, right? So yeah, so therefore ended up liking e-GMAT. Spoke to a couple of people who'd taken up e-GMAT subscriptions earlier, and the fact that all of them wholeheartedly recommended meant or sort of validated my decision to go ahead. So yeah, so started with e-GMAT that way.
understood. That's great. Okay. So now let's try and understand how you went from a verbal 83 to a verbal 87, 99th percentile, right? Let's start with the CR bit. So
Right.
even though you were starting at a pretty decent level in verbal, I would say, I'm sure there were still some challenges. One, what were the challenges that you were facing in CR and what did you do to overcome those CR challenges?
Right. So I think the first thing that was extremely challenging for me when I started my prep with CR was the requirement that I had to unlearn some of the things that I was naturally doing, right?
Yeah,
Because I came from a decent score in verbal, I felt like there was something that I must be doing right. But then very quickly I realized that that is always, there's going to be a glass ceiling on that, right? If I'm not following the right process, There are going to be questions of a certain difficulty that are not going to be work for the methods that I have, right?
Yeah.
And it was very frustrating because having to learn new methods while your methods more or less work is and of course in the beginning it's going to be fairly challenging, right? So therefore you make mistakes on things that you otherwise wouldn't if you sort of reverted to your original method, right? So that was a bit challenging, and yeah, so ended up taking some time to internalize some of the advice and processes and methods that were a part of the CR course, pre-thinking, and sort of going about each question in a very systematic manner, even if the answer seems like it jumps out to you. Still making sure that in the study and practice duration, you're actually applying the process rather than just looking for the right answer. I think that, of course, was very, very challenging and ultimately very helpful as well.
Right, right. You spoke about unlearning certain things and then learning the new things.
Right.
So what exactly in CR did you learn that helped you to get consistently correct answers for hard questions, something that you were struggling with your own instinctive methods that you had?
Right. So there's a very large emphasis placed in the course that you should pre-think, right? And that you should spend some time to figure out the direction or sort of line of thinking that you want to pursue before actually looking at the options, right? Uh, Before that, and that was very, it wasn't very instinctive because you instantly, so you'll obviously read the passage, try and understand as much as possible, and you instantly want to go to the answers so that you kind of have it fresh in your memory and you're able to very quickly select or reject options, right?
Correct.
That was challenging because it's not very, it doesn't feel very natural. So
Yeah.
I often found myself reverting to this method of, okay, fine, I've read this, I've understood this, I'm not sure if I can pre-think correctly, I'm not sure if I should spend any more time, let me just quickly go into the option choice analysis, and I'm sure it'll be pretty good, right? Like I'll be able to pick an option that is more or less right. Now, the thing with that is when you get to a certain level of difficulty, that does not work because there are option choices that are very similar in terms of correctness. Therefore, if you haven't spent some time to articulate what you think the gap might be in the argument or where you think there might be something to exploit within the argument, you will end up sort of recycling between options over and over again. A, B, C, D, E, everything. Nothing jumps out as inherently true. So therefore, you'll go back again, and I sort of remember this one question where I think I must have done this at least 5 times,
Okay.
cyclically, A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. None of it made sense, right? So I think that was, and then I conclusively decided that is a process, something that I should try and avoid in my learning journey so that it gets better in the long run.
Right, right. So do you remember initially how long would it take for you to solve a CR hard question by after you internalize the pre-thinking approach?
Right.
How soon were you able to solve a hard question?
Yeah, so I think that improvement was quite drastic. And in fact, I hadn't even realized that improvement had happened. So
Okay.
in the very beginning, right? So in some of the quizzes that I was doing after having gone through the course material, of course, applying these processes means it's going to take some additional time. On average, I take for all non-boldface questions maybe about 3.5 minutes to internalize everything and maybe go through the options once.
Okay.
And for boldface, typically for me, it would take a little bit longer because something about it was sort of a little bit confusing to me. So therefore, boldface would take maybe about 4+ minutes.
Right.
And as I kind of became proficient at the process, such that I didn't have to sequentially or intentionally decide that this is the process. It became internal. This became much faster. I think on average, towards the end, I was able to solve most questions in say a 2 to 2.5 minute
That's
kind of a range on hard ones, and boldface would still take a little bit more time for me personally.
understood. But not as long as it was
Of course not.
earlier.
That improvement was drastic. And I still remember towards the end, I was quite surprised that I'm able to do hard questions such so quickly while applying the right process.
Correct. Okay. All right. That's fantastic. Let's talk about reading comprehension.
Right.
You seem to be somebody who is pretty comfortable with the English language, Are you an avid reader, by the way?
I am not. I'm not consistently avid, but I've read a little bit in my life. That's probably what I
Okay,
can say.
all right, all right. So initially, when you started with the reading comprehension journey, what were your challenges there, and how did you overcome those challenges?
Right. So I think pace of reading is something that I don't think. Okay, let me put it this way. Right. So throughout my journey, I think my pace of reading has improved.
Okay,
Not just in the GMAT context, but I think over practice and repetition for how many ever months, I think that my pace of reading has improved. Not that I'm reading faster, but I'm able to comprehend slightly better, right?
right,
So in the beginning, that was a challenge for sure. Reading comprehension questions were typically like the biggest challenge with them was time, because I know if I
right,
spend enough time on it, I'll be able to get to the answer. But of course, it's you don't work in that kind of a scenario where you have as
yeah,
much time as you need. Another challenge was sort of committing important details to memory
right,
because reading comprehension is fairly large. Of course, you have to sort of decide what aspects of the passage you want to commit to memory, and what aspects you can sort of scan through. So that was a little bit challenging in the beginning because I didn't know which one was important and which wasn't.
right.
That definitely improved as well over time. So these are maybe broadly two challenges that I had with RC.
Okay. And any specific reading strategies that you learned from the course that you found were really helpful in bringing the time down?
I think the biggest one was visualization, right? So
Okay.
it sort of goes without saying. And of course, now after having been through the journey, it seems very obvious that that is something that is so profound. But visualization is I think we remember better if we're able to visualize.
Yeah.
If it's abstract words, then it's not as easy to commit to memory.
Yeah.
But then building that habit of making sure that you're not zoning out, making sure that every sentence that you read, you're committing a certain level of visualization towards that.
Yeah.
I think really helped to the point where towards the end, I did not really have to tell myself before each question that, okay, I'm going to
Yeah.
visualize this, right? So I sort of
Yeah.
had this, let's say, technique or something that worked for me personally was as soon as I sort of finish a question in
Yeah.
verbal, right? I know I've clicked I mean, I've submitted the answer, therefore I'm about to go to the next one, right? So the
Yeah.
first word that I read, I'm going to read with a lot of intent and a lot of focus, right? Just the first word.
Right. Yeah.
And that sort of became a habit over time. And then I think it really helped with the visualization aspect as well.
Right. Right. So overall, I think you were expecting a really good score on verbal, which is why I think you also started your test with the verbal section, right?
Yeah, yeah. I experimented a little bit with trying to see if I can maybe dedicate a little, maybe dedicate freshness of I mean, be more fresh for some aspects of the test rather than verbal, but then that didn't really work out. So I decided that
Right.
I should consolidate my strengths. So sort of started with verbal.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And when I say that, doing well on the verbal was kind of expected, I say this because we were able to predict this from the Scholarani dashboard, right? If you look at this, you look at your stats here, the last 20 attempts. I mean, who scores this, Aswan? This is ridiculous, right? This is telling me that you were certain to score a 99th percentile on verbal. And look at this. This is only getting better, right on the last attempt. So you were killing it in verbal, right? So I think what is important here for everybody else to understand is that when something is a strength, it's important to maximize it instead of thinking that, okay, this is already good, let me just focus on other things. And that is something that you did, and you did that very diligently. So kudos to you on that, right?
Thank you.
Let's go to the DI section where
Just
you
before that,
scored.
quickly,
Yeah,
wanted to mention one thing which I think really helped me with verbal, right?
please.
So in quants, it's clear what your errors are, right? So therefore, there is a path to improvement.
Yeah,
With verbal, it's a little more abstract because you don't really
yeah,
know where you're going wrong, right?
yeah,
So one of the things that I really liked was the emphasis by you guys on maintaining an error log.
yeah,
Of course, it helped me in quants as well, but in verbal, it helped me a lot because
Okay.
before setting up an error log, I wasn't sure what exactly I was doing incorrectly,
Yeah.
right? The sort of act of trying to articulate what happened in verbal, in a very abstract scenario, you're trying to find patterns, right? And you're trying to understand what are, some things in your way of thinking
Yeah.
that aren't working well for the test, right? So I think that really helped. When I looked at, the score that you just flashed on my screen right now, I sort of remembered that, some of these attempts were after having gone through the error log that I'd maintained for months,
Okay.
repeatedly, over and over again, and then
Right.
was able to weed out some of these things. Yeah.
Were you able to find some similarities in the types of questions that you solved on the Scholarinium portal and the ones that you faced on the test?
Yeah, I think so. For me, the similarities sort of were a lot for quants for sure,
Okay.
and verbal. Maybe not so much on the DI section, but quants and verbal were quite similar. The thing with verbal on Scholarinium was the reason why there's improvement over time in my attempts is that after having done say 100, 200 questions, you're able to preempt what this next question is going to be about just by sort of reading a little bit, right? So
Okay,
you're sort
that's
of,
interesting.
yeah, you sort of tune yourself to be able to look for inconsistencies in logic,
Yeah,
which happens over which happens over practice over wide variety of questions, which I
exactly.
really liked on the Scholarinium. The question bank that we had on the Scholarinium. I sort of tried and do the. I did try to do that with the OG questions as well, but I don't think there was the same sort of breadth of differences, in each
Okay,
question. So I really like the verbal questions in the Scholarinium particularly.
okay. What
Yeah.
you just said about, solving more than 200 questions and then being in a position to preempt what the next question could be like, it reminds me of an analogy in terms of sports because especially cricket, right? India is a cricket loving nation. So people always wonder how does a Virat Kohli or a Rohit Sharma or a Sachin Tendulkar would hit a 150-kilometer per hour ball coming towards them out of the park.
Yeah.
And they always say it is reaction for sure. It is also training for sure because your body reacts because you cannot think what you'll do to such a quick ball. But
Right.
what they say is when you practice so much, you start preempting what the next ball is going to be like. You
Yeah.
get into the bowler's brains and you
Right.
start predicting, okay, now because I've done this, this bowler is going to try and bowl here. And
Yeah.
then you look at the field setting and then oh, you're already there, okay, this is going to be a bouncer, so you're already there, ready to pull it back for a six.
Right.
Right. So I think this is what practice does and this is what error log does.
Yeah.
It makes you more and more proactive.
Correct.
And Aswan, trust me when I say this, Errorlog is the most underrated tool
Right.
on the GMAT journey.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
You
There's
agree, right?
this very, very interesting concept which sort of talks
Hmm.
about what is required for learning. And it says one of the most important things. I think there's four aspects to learning, and
Hmm.
one of the most important ones is feedback. Because if you
Right.
don't know what you're doing right or wrong, and it's not available to you instantaneously, there
Yeah,
is no learning, right? And the
correct.
error log is the best way to make sure that you are supplying yourself, your mind, with the requisite amount of feedback so that it can take corrective action. And I cannot recommend this enough, and cannot you can't be you should be as diligent as you can with your error log.
Yeah,
It can seem repetitive, but it's going to pay dividends over the long
yeah,
run. Yeah.
yeah. Glad we spoke about this. Nice. Let's go to DI now. Aslan, you
Right.
scored a DI83, which translates to a 96th percentile. Although I am aware that you're not completely satisfied with that score because even I believe that you could have done way better there, right? Again, not taking away from the 96 percentile that you already achieved. That's again not a mean feat. And but I think you also believe that you could have done better there, right? But we'll come to that. How did you prepare yourself for the DI section?
So I prepared for DI after having completed verbal and quant. I think those
Right.
are fundamental to being able to approach DI in the right way.
Right.
And yeah, without that, it's not possible to improve in DI, I think.
Yeah.
So after having done verbal and quant, moved to DI. The challenge with DI is if GMAT as a whole is ambiguous in terms of what you need to do to improve, DI is
Yeah.
probably the most ambiguous, right?
Yeah.
Because there's
So,
nothing obvious that you can do to say, okay, fine, I will get better at reading graphs, right? So
yeah.
that's, I mean, it's fairly difficult to articulate how you're going to get better at something.
Yeah.
Um, so this is something that you sort of have to rely on practice. You'll have to rely
Mm.
on a wide variety of questions that you have to expose yourself to and sticking
Right.
the course. A lot of times in my preparation journey, be it whatever module, be it quant, verbal, or DI, a poor score in a practice test would be
Right.
very disheartening and sort of would, for example, the hard cementing questions, right?
Right.
If I haven't done exceedingly well, or if I haven't done the medium cementing questions to a degree that I'm happy with, I
Yeah.
sort of let that affect my motivation to sort of pick up the hard cementing questions.
Right.
And that can be very challenging. And that can sort of morph into not studying for some time, right?
Yeah.
It becomes something that before you know it, you haven't studied for so long and then now you're demotivated, right? So
Yeah.
that's important to kind of put those things in perspective. It's fine if you don't score well in specific quizzes, as long as you are
Right.
making sure that you are putting them into the error log, you are extracting maximum value from that.
Okay.
And with DI, I think that was really sort of difficult for me because there's a lot of initially it felt like there was a lot of things that I wasn't able to do correctly.
Right.
But again, with the same sort of approach, error log,
Yeah.
trying to articulate how to, navigate scenarios in specific DI questions,
Right.
and sort of making core principles that are going to be helpful across any DI questions for yourself.
Yeah.
It's a very personal thing because it sort of depends on how you think and how you solve these questions, right? So doing that for
Yeah.
yourself across a wide variety of questions, I think that was something that was very helpful from
Yeah.
from a scholar in a perspective. Very very interesting questions and obviously a lot of questions to go through.
Yeah. Yeah. While I was just sharing my screen and taking people watching this video right now through your DI course, a few things that I observed. One, uh, there were a lot of A grades indicating that you were giving it your all, trying to be as diligent as you can be. There were a few B grades as well, which means that just diligence is not enough.
Right.
You will have some bumps in the DI road, but what is important is that you make a comeback.
Yeah.
Just how smooth and wonderful your verbal stats look like on Scholarium, your DI Scholarium does have a lot of highs, but those highs are usually after a few initial lows,
Right.
right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
so how did you, like you just said, this usually gets translated to demotivation. How did you keep yourself motivated after some such not so satisfactory performances? Was there something, specific that you would tell yourself, that you would think? What was the mindset?
Right. Looking back on this, I don't think I was particularly successful at,
Yeah,
making sure that those things didn't get to me. I think as much as I even knew that this is something that is affecting me, that it shouldn't affect me, the gap between knowing and actually being able to do something about it does exist for
yeah,
most people, if not all. And it did for me as well. I think what definitely helped is the fact that there was a plan that was in place,
yeah,
and the plan. I mean, of course, I used the planner on e-GMAT to kind of create my journey. But
right,
then the moment I realized that that is something that I will not be able to, stay consistent with,
yeah,
I sort of had to create a plan for myself and then
right,
started tracking things on my own and creating buffers and making sure that even if I do miss some milestones,
right,
making sure that I get back quickly enough. Of course, it wasn't perfect,
right.
but it did take a lot of lot of failures to get to a point where I realized
Yeah,
that that was something that is avoidable.
understood. So Aswan, a lot of GMAT aspirants who nowadays take the test or are in the mock stages who are currently studying with us, they majorly struggle a lot with time management in DI,
Right.
right? And I'm sure you also had your own struggles with that.
Right.
Any strategies that you believed worked for you? Any strategies that you believe you should have followed, but you did not, which is why you scored a DI83 instead of a probable DI84, 85?
Right. So I don't want to seem ungrateful. I think I'm more or less happy with my outcome.
Yeah,
However, I do feel like it was a missed opportunity because there was a trend, there was a strategy that was sort of out there that I should have employed. So across some of my mocks, the some of the mocks where I didn't do very well in DI were definitely because of time management. There
yeah,
comes a point while you're attempting the DI section where you're stuck on a problem, and by spending more time on that problem, you are putting all the subsequent problems at risk, right?
yeah,
And so DI, at least in my opinion, is slightly different from verbal and quants in this
yes,
aspect, which is if you let's say have 2 minutes left or 3 minutes left and you have three questions, right?
yeah,
And if you're say decently proficient at verbal, you can get to a point where your probability of the right answer goes from 20% to
yeah,
50%, having been able to read through it quickly. With
yeah,
DI, unfortunately, that's not the case. You
true,
need a minimum amount of time to be able to get to any level of certainty or improvement in probability of you being able to answer that question. So, therefore, when you put subsequent problems at risk by spending too much time on some of these really hard questions, I think that is a trend that I observed in pretty much all my mocks where if I'm able to stitch together 4 to 5 right questions in the beginning, and
right,
then there it comes a very hard DI question that maybe is a three-parter, maybe has three questions, right? So
yeah,
therefore you feel like this is something you absolutely have to crack, right?
yeah,
So end up spending a lot more time and feeling time pressured. As it is time pressured, but if you spend a lot
true,
more time on some question and then don't really feel confident that you've got the right answer,
yeah,
that can play a significant part. Um, I did realize this, but again, I think this is a trap. This is a mental trap, which is when you're going through a situation like this, even though you've told yourself before that if this happens, I'm going to do,
yeah,
let's say I'm going to skip this or I'm going to come back to this at a later point. In
yeah,
that moment, you still feel like you can get this, right? And
yeah,
perhaps it's a fallacy, perhaps it's something to manage, perhaps it's something that if I taken maybe a little bit, maybe some more marks could have
yeah,
identified what my how I could have improved in that. But yeah, I think definitely that's something that people should try and practice in their mocks, see how that strategy works for them. If you are coming across a question that you are able to judge that within about say 2.5 3 minutes you
yeah,
will not be able to solve this, right?
right,
Then there's something to do about that.
yeah,
Yeah.
true. This I think is going to be extremely helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So now that DI is out of the way, let's speak about quant, right?
Right.
You come from an engineering background, and engineers believe quant is a cakewalk. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you also have such a perception about quant?
Absolutely not. So I think like I started off well in verbal, like my
Mhm.
base ability in verbal was good. It was the opposite for me in quant. So my first attempt in quant, I scored a very low percentile in quant, and quant was the one that was sort of pulling my grade down, which
79,
is very
Q79,
sorry.
Q79.
Q79, right.
Mm,
So yeah, that's very unlike a lot of the people that I spoke to who were also taking GMAT.
mm.
So yeah, so I didn't at all start, from that mindset that quant is a cakewalk. For me, quant was the thing that I really had to work really hard towards and spend a lot of time towards to try and
Yeah,
be able to improve with quant. Yeah,
right, right. Uh, so you're one of those very few engineers who uh, admit this. Okay. And I'm glad that you took the diagnostic career mock because I think that would have been a humbling experience, right?
right,
Because you would have truly understood where you stand in quant,
right.
right? And yeah, so starting at a Q17, and I think you had already been humbled because of the initial score. So what do you think was your strategy to uh, first figure out the challenges that you already have in quant because of which you are at a Q79? And then again, what exactly helped you to move from a Q79 to a Q86?
Right. So after having analyzed my first mock, I realized that there are areas in quants, specific areas that I'm weak at, and there are areas that are comparatively better, right? So I think that was very helpful in kind of understanding where I should spend most of my time towards. Another challenge with quants for me is I'm fairly comfortable. I'm fairly comfortable sort of doing some of these easier quants questions in my head, but then I don't have the right process if it comes to a hard question. So whatever score I do get
Correct.
in quants, it's on easy to medium questions that I'm able to figure out
Yeah.
mentally. But then if you ask me to put down a framework, or maybe think of ways in which you can simplify this, I think those were my weak areas, right? So I think realizing these two factors was really important. It really
Uh-huh.
helped because there were specific gaps in my capability that I had to fill, which
Okay.
always is a lot easier if you exactly know what it is, right?
Yeah.
So with regards to some of these areas in quants that like specific topics, for example, probability was something that I sort of, no matter how much I felt like I was applying myself, it
Right.
always seemed to evade me, right? So there's a couple
Yeah.
of things that really helped me. One is, so I sort of made it a point to do some X number of questions before moving on to the next topic. No
Okay.
matter how accurate I might be, even if I am
Mhm.
accurate, that is, I would still not move to the next topic, right?
Okay.
And the second thing is I started trying to sort of bucket them into different types of questions within the same topic, right? So, for
Okay.
example, in probability questions, you have similarities among four questions because they ask for this having given that, right?
Right.
So, when you're able to bucket them over time, if you do maybe about 50, 60 questions in a certain topic, you will be able to articulate what different types, by and large, might show
Yeah.
up, right? And what that gives you is a framework to attack these questions when you're able, when you're actually having to, do it in the exam.
Yeah.
That is something that I think really helped me to be able to categorize types of questions and how you approach specific questions in a
Right.
specific manner. Yeah,
Okay. All right. And I was just going through your course attempt, and I could figure out that you saved overall, I think, 25 hours using the PACE engine, right?
right.
Uh, so how did the PACE engine help you save a bit of time, which is, I think, extremely crucial in the GMAT journey?
Right. Yeah. So it's a really efficient way to focus on what you should be focusing on. Like I said just a little while ago, I think what really helped me is being able to understand what gaps I needed to bridge. And the PACE
Right.
engine is a more formalized way of doing the same exact thing, right? So
Right.
there's obviously, I'm sure that there's a bunch of intelligence that's built into be able to figure out. Even if I
Right.
personally am not able to realize that this is a strong suit or a weak suit, I think, of course, I don't know how it works in the back end, but I'm sure that it is geared towards that, right? So helps
Yeah.
you prioritize where to spend your time on. And to
Right.
be honest, considering my quants timeline that I wanted to complete my sort of study in, it did seem like a lot in terms of total time commitment required.
Yeah.
But then the Pace engine kind of helped me prioritize that a little bit better and more or less was able to stay on in terms of the
Yeah.
plan that I had.
Right. I also remember a few minutes ago you spoke about how you uh, could find a lot of similarities between the Scholarium questions on Quant and the ones that you found on the test. If you could just elaborate a little on that.
I'm not sure if there is anything to elaborate there. I think on so maybe let me put it this way, right? When I gave the first mock,
Mhm.
my baseline mock, I had to think on most of these questions from first principles. The first time I'm looking at something like this, and therefore I have to come up with reasoning to figure out what exactly I have to do.
Yeah.
My exam experience was not at all like that. My exam experience was
Okay.
okay, this matches that, right? This is
Yeah.
something that I have done. And for that, this is what I need to do. So that
Yeah.
insight, if you're having to figure out, if you're having to come up with the insight that you need, on
Right.
most of the questions in the exam on spot, that's not going to leave you much time in being able to finish. But I
Right.
think the reason why I'm able to say this is because quants was something that I was able to finish quite quickly. And I remember, I think for my last question I had about 7 minutes left, which
Wow.
was unlike my mock experiences. So I wasn't expecting it to be that way. But what I did realize is these are things that I have come across, and I have ready sort of models to be able to attack these questions. So
Right.
that's why I'm able to confidently say that there's a lot of
Mm.
similarities.
Yeah, this helps.
Yeah,
Right. Let's move to the mock stage. You took a few mocks, right? And your
right.
mock scores ranged from a 665 usually, between 665 and 695, barring a couple of mocks that did not go your way, which I believe is extremely normal,
Right.
because it's such a long journey, right? You will have those odd bad days, right? So here it is, right? You're scoring at a 665, another 665, 605 here. Then there was a 655 also on the official marks. And the last mark that you took was a 695 just before taking the test, a day or two before the GMAT, right?
Yeah,
So my first question on a mock journey is to understand what would you do between two mocks to
right.
try and see some sort of an improvement from the previous mock.
Right. So one of the things I realized when I realized this fairly quickly in my GMAT preparation journey is that okay, so when you go through an error log and you're trying to find
Right,
patterns, you can, okay, but then you can't. For example, if I score 50% in one test and score 70 in another, that
right,
two additional questions that you got right, it does not indicate anything. It's
yeah,
just a function of the variability involved in the test, right?
yeah,
So with regards to my mock, what I wanted to do, and I think you can see it on your screen there, I kind of made it a point to give two mocks at a time. So I'd give one in the
okay,
morning and one in the evening, right?
okay,
So the reason why I want to do that is so that I have enough information to be able to take corrective action, right?
right,
Because one test, I'm sure it's happened to me many times that I've done really well in quant, even though I didn't feel like I did well, even though I didn't feel like I, let's say, quote unquote, deserved that score.
okay,
Ended up doing pretty well in quants, but then that is not reflective of my capability or my skill
right,
set up until that point. So kind of decided that when I was going to take mocks, I was going to take more than one in a day, right? And then derive inferences from that. So the
right,
same error log process that I applied throughout my preparation journey is something that I did fairly vigorously in my mocks. So I would
right,
do a couple of mocks and then look at exactly what went wrong, why did it go wrong, how was my time
right,
management, right? What are some things that I can improve on, right? And then
right,
based on that, I'd make a plan. Of course,
right,
because of the fact that I mean, I started giving mocks maybe just a week before the exam, which I think in retrospect I should start a little bit earlier, but
hmm,
because of that I only had about 2 days to prepare again, right? So then
okay,
spent 2 days focusing exactly on those points, again using the scholarinium to be able to apply those learnings, right? Doing quick tests, doing condensed sectional tests, right? And then making sure that each of those points I'm correcting to a degree where I'm not making the same mistake again, right? So that is
right,
what I did, and then was fairly confident that in my third mock I was going to score well, but then ended up with a 605, and that
right,
was very disheartening because here I was after having prepared for so long, and after having at least in my mind weeded out some of the issues that I was facing, and
yeah,
being completely ready, I scored a very poor score, right?
yeah,
In context to what my target score was. So that was very disheartening. But then I knew that my plan was to do two at a time, right? So I'm not going to read into one mock. I'm going to give
yeah,
another mock, and then I'm going to look at it collectively. And luckily for me, in the second one, I did 695. So
right,
therefore, between those two, I realized, okay, these are the mistakes I made here, and if I'm able to correct that,
right,
this is what is possible. So I think being hyper aware of what is it that you're doing that is
mhm,
causing issues, right? Being very diligent in making sure that you keep those top of mind. So whenever I take a mock, I'd after the mock kind of put together some thoughts that I had about the mock, right?
mm,
Actually putting it on paper is a very good exercise because it's not going to last in your memory, and maybe a
yeah,
day later you'll paint a completely different picture. right?
Yeah.
But then putting it on paper is going to keep that experience fresh, right? And that really
Right.
helps you be able to figure out what is it that you need to do to be able to improve.
Right. Understood. Very, very nicely explained. Okay. Aslan, coming to your test experience, right? Do you think you have something to share with the GMAT aspirants watching this video? Something that you believe could help them on that test day? Because look, all the preparation that you do for the last few months, uh, all gets evaluated on that one day, those 2.5 hours. So, any tips that would make sure that students have those 2.5 hours completely prepared on what all can happen with them?
Right. So I kind of want to share my journey, hoping that this test day experience doesn't happen to anyone else, right? That's the intention
Yeah.
here. So I wasn't aware that there was a certain requirement for a certain document to be taken for the test center. So
Okay.
I in the email from GMAC, it said that I had to take a passport, but then I got an email from Pearson which said that I had to get a copy of the appointment letter and a photocopy of this passport. So I didn't know this. Now I had sort of thought of all Pearson emails as spam because I'm in this GMAT journey and I'm getting emails from everybody. And I didn't
Yeah.
look at that email. And of course, I reached the exam day, and then at the entry, they're sort of telling me that they'll not be able to let me in if not for that, right?
Oh,
Yeah. So fortunately, I was there about 45 minutes earlier. So I had just enough time to make a quick but very, very hurried and stressful trip to a photocopy place and get all my documents in order, and then just about made it back in time to the exam center. And I think so. Like I've sort of been talking about throughout this whole video that there are these certain principles that I've articulated for myself that I need to remind myself before I'm attempting a question, before I'm attempting a test. I had made a fairly exhaustive list of all the points that I wanted them to be top of mind before I end, right? Unfortunately,
yeah.
because of that, I wasn't able to do that, right? Because now it was just about making sure that I enter, So I think looking back, what I would do is give a call to the test center one day before, right?
Right.
Also realized that the test center ended up being a lot farther than I had expected. So
Okay.
I planned to kind of go a little bit earlier, ended up taking a little bit more time. So I think that is something that can definitely help. These are all these small things that add up, to give you a great score. And these are things that you should very sort of low hanging fruit kind of
Yeah.
opportunities that you can tap into. Just make sure that you have everything in order. Make sure that there is nothing that can go wrong, right?
Yeah.
Of course, make sure that you're well hydrated. Make sure that you're in the right headspace to be able to go and give the exam. So the thing is, I do think I was very stressed before the exam because of the variability in the last two mocks. By the way, those two mocks I took 2 days before my actual
Right.
exam. So therefore, because that variability was there, I was a little bit worried. But then I did know that okay, if I apply myself and apply all my learning, it should be
Yeah.
okay, right? So I was able to
Yeah.
calm myself down. The actual test experience. So yeah, there were some things that were not ideal. There were some things that sort of make me look back and wonder if had that not been the case, maybe would have been more reflective of the effort or whatever it could be. Right? I'm not again not ungrateful for my score, but there are
Right.
things that aren't ideal. And maybe it does help to kind of preempt these things and make sure that you're prepared for these kinds of scenarios, right? So the first
Right.
one was, yeah, there was. I actually sort of thought of doing this much earlier. I wanted to. There's this. I think you can order the scratch pad on Amazon
Yeah.
just so that you can have that feel. I sort of
Right.
planned to do that, but towards the end, I'd forgotten, and I
Okay.
continued working with pen and paper. And then maybe like a day or 2 days before GMAT, I remembered, okay, maybe I should have done that. And then by then it was too late, so I thought, okay, we'll manage, right? But then I think
Right.
that puts you in a very uncomfortable situation in the exam.
Yeah.
So I had a very specific method of writing when it came to verbal questions, right? So besides taking notes, there's a way that I would sort of tackle what I felt about each option, right? Is it
Okay.
100% out of the question? Is it possible? Is it right? Is it certainly right? So across these four, I had four different ways in which I would mark, and that was the whole basis of the way that I tackled verbal questions, right?
Okay.
And unfortunately, what happened is, there was the whole sort of equipment that they gave us, the
Right.
marker that they would give and the scratch pad that kept drying out, right?
Okay.
And what ended up happening is for me to make sure that it would write, I'd have to close it every time I attempted a question, which
Right.
was nothing like I had done ever before, right? So
Right.
that really, I think, put me in a very difficult space in the very beginning, because the verbal was the first thing I was kind of worried a little bit, also having had this bad experience of, okay,
Yeah.
having run for about 45 minutes, right? So that did put me in a little bit of a discomfortable, uncomfortable situation, right?
Yeah.
So I think if you can get the scratch pad, if you can, and it's just nothing, it's a laminated sheet that you can
Yeah.
laminate any kind of paper, right? And then just get a marker, an OHP marker.
Yeah.
Maybe last couple of days, just practice with that, right?
Yeah.
It's definitely going to help you feel familiar. That exam setting is going to feel familiar, and therefore you'll be able to be in the right headspace to be able to,
Yeah.
do well in the exam. That is one thing. And I don't know, I don't think this is something that's very common, but then there was a lot of sort of noise disturbance
Okay.
in in my verbal section towards the end,
Okay.
for about 5-6 minutes, and especially sort of this was, I think these are the last three questions, and I think I had an RC passage. I think last
Okay.
four or last three. I had an RC passage, and there was this sort of music-like situation happening. Uh, and this was not avoidable, and I kind of felt like
Yeah.
I was not able to focus, even though I'm kind of going over all the words. It felt like I couldn't really register what was happening, right?
Yeah.
To the point where I ended up having to shut my ears close with my own hands. And,
Right.
I did inform the proctor about it, but he said he can't do anything about it. So there are going to be some of these things that are somewhat unpredictable.
Right.
I'm not sure if you can do something about the latter, but I think the former, which is, just get familiar with what, the OHP marker and the scratch pad. And I think that should help. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Again, small things, but do play a huge role, especially on such a big day.
Yeah.
Right. So, Asfan, we've come to the end of this interview, and of course, your journey has also ended, at least with the GMAT, right? The application journey and the MBA journey continues, right? Thank you for all the insights that you shared with us. Thank you for sharing all the rights and the wrongs from your journey. I'm sure a lot of people who are looking for some motivation will look at your journey, and I think even if uh, one or two people succeed out of after going through your video, I think that would have been uh, a great kind of a gesture that you would have done, right, to give it back to the community, and the interview is going to be successful, right?
Yeah.
So thank you so much first for doing this, because I think you also learned from somebody like this,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
thought of giving it back. So that's really kind and sweet of you. So thank you so much. And again, a big congratulations from e-GMAT and me, right? We're really proud, one, that you chose us to help you succeed here. Second, that we were able to be a part of this successful journey, right? And we could play our little part, whatever we could, to the best of our abilities. But the credit goes to you. You had it in you to do this, and I'm glad that this ended this way.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the support. Um, Especially, everything. I think the course, the way it was structured, there was a lot of structure, and sort of the flow was something that made a lot of sense. And your support as well, in terms of mentoring and guiding, and whenever I'd overreact to a situation, kind of pulling me back and making sure that I stay the course. I think those were some really useful things for me in my journey. So thank you so much. Yeah.
No problems. That was a pleasure. All right, then. With this, we will end this debrief session. Thank you so much to everybody who stayed till the end. I'm sure Asman's journey is going to help you uh, get to where you wish to see yourself. So yeah, thank you so much and take care.